So, what is Afrofuturism? Afrofuturism is really about the black body and the black mind seeing itself put into a space that is beyond the white supremacist structure that we're currently in at the moment. So it's placing ourselves outside into a paradigm of futurism, Afrofuturism. The term was invented by Mark Derry in 1993 in his essay Black to the Future. In that essay he wrote, "Speculative fiction that treats African American themes and addresses African American concerns in the context of 20th century technoculture, and more generally, it is African American signification that appropriates images of technology and a prosthetically enhanced might, for want of a better term, be called Afrofuturism." And the first slide I've got up here is of Sun Ra, who some of you might know, some might not know. But Sun Ra is probably one of the pillars of Afrofuturism, and it works across different genres. So we're talking film, media, music and literature, the two main being music and literature, I would say. So just to get us into a kind of Afrofuturist vibe and mood and kind of get us out of this kind of square, westernized room, I'm going to play a short clip from Sun Ra's Space is the Place to put us into that vibe, and then we can continue onto the African Space Programme.
This music is all a part of another tomorrow, another kind of language. Speaking things of nature, naturalness, the way it should be. Speaking things of blackness, about the void, the endless void, the bottomless pit surrounding you.
A better day is breaking. The galaxies are waiting. The planet Earth's awakening. Oh, we sing this song to a great tomorrow. Oh, we sing this song to abolish sorrow. Oh, we sing this song to a great tomorrow. Oh, we sing this song to abolish sorrow.
Why doesn't the earth fall? How can you walk upon it? It's the music. It's the music of the earth, the music of the sun and the stars, the music of yourself, vibrating. Yes, you're music too. You're all instruments. Everyone's supposed to be playing their part in this vast orchestra of the cosmos.
A great tomorrow. Oh, we sing this song to abolish sorrow. Abolish sorrow. Abolish sorrow. Abolish sorrow.
So in the imagery you can see a lot of sort of African cosmology, Egyptian cosmology, and sort of these ideas of ancestral worship, bringing those into a opposition to the colonialised mind, I guess, which is the Christian white supremacist mind that was imposed on African slaves. There's a lot of things around Afrofuturism just connecting through ancestral worship, which I'll touch on again a bit later, actually. But let's talk about literature. So Samuel Delany is a queer African-American science fiction writer, probably one of the most famous besides Octavia Butler. And he said about science fiction is just thinking about the world out there. It's also thinking about how that world might be. A particularly important exercise for those who are oppressed, because if they're going to change the world we live in, they and all of us have to be able to think about a world that works differently. And some of the other writers that are working around those issues are Natalie Hopkinson, if I think off the top of my head, I already said Octavia Butler, I just got it. I've got that stage fear, so you have to come and speak to me later when I'm on the panel, actually, and I'll probably reel off about 10 by that point. An exercise for those who are oppressed, and how we create images that are outside of that oppression for ourselves as afrofuturists, as black artists, as black comic book artists. And some artists around who are working around comic books and things are people like, one of my favourite comics at the moment is Jiba Anderson's Horseman, which is a comic series placed around Yoruba gods and goddesses. Now, the Yoruba gods and goddesses are part of sort of Nigerian Orisha culture, and they are Shango, Yamaya, Oshun, who else is there? Obatala as well. And when the slaves went over, were taken to places like the Caribbean and Cuba, they syncretized their religions with the Catholic religion, which is the religion that I was brought up in. And so what happened is that you ended up with this mix of mysticism, Catholicism, and people using those gods as cover-ups, essentially, for the African gods. And this is reflected in the Horseman comics, which is good. So you have like these characters, and then behind them, they all represent different gods and goddesses of Yoruba culture. And there is Camille Charlet, the creator of the comic Captain Cachula, which uses a dinke and a Khan symbols, which is from Ghana. And, I'm really bad with names, Nenge Akapem recreated her own water fairy tale, which is reminiscent of African mermaids, by transforming herself into a space sea siren hybrid human jellyfish thing. And there's a lot of hybrids going on there. And many artists reference the Dogon people, which I will touch on a bit later, who believe their ancestors arrived on a flying ark from a distant star. So that's literature, that's comics. There's also visual artists as well, which I'm not going to touch upon today. But going back into music, which for me is a DJ and a musician, is probably one of the main things to do with Afrofuturism that I work around, and also around digital histories. And there's a piece by an author, Daniel Kreese, who was writing about how Sun Ra and the Black Panthers appropriated technology, and the piece is called Appropriating the Master's Tools. Now, the Master's Tools, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the black feminist writer, author, Audre Lorde, and she has this famous quote, which is, "The Master's tools will never dismantle the Master's house." And so it's about creating our own tools as those of the African diaspora to dismantle institutions like this. And it's a lovely room, so I'm not going to keep going on about the room, but it's very representative. Like we said, there's dead white men on the wall, so we can't dismantle those structures by recreating it with dead black men, for example. We need to completely dismantle the gender binary, patriarchy, and all that kind of stuff. So Daniel Kreese writes, in 1952, musician Sun Ra began using metaphors of Cold War technologies in performances in an effort to create a technological, empowered mythic consciousness for black people that he imagined would turn this to consciousness. Through his music, Sun Ra constructed and performed what Daniel calls a black knowledge society, a metaphorical utopia of consciousness. There's a lot of consciousness there. Facilitated by science and technology and grounded in the cultural values of ancient Egypt and a reimagining of outer space. Sun Ra's engagements with artifacts and metaphors of energy, outer space, and advanced technologies represent a black cultural uptake, a reconception of Cold War science in terms of long-established African-American social narratives of liberation. And Sun Ra believed that African Americans were going to be left behind as the technology changed around them unless they developed the technical agency to both use and reinvent the tools of white society, in Audre Lorde. For Sun Ra, this agency could be established through the creation of a mythic consciousness for black people that was centred on the method of knowledge society. informed by the cultural imagining of Egypt and outer space. Outer space and how that forms itself in Afrofuturist music. I say Afrofuturist music because that music works across different genres. It works across Samoa from jazz, to George Clinton, to Janelle Monáe, to Outkast, and a wealth of others. But let's go to George Clinton, who I actually DJ'd for 5 years ago. I think that's just quite an interesting story, so I might tell it because it's wacky. It's like a science fiction novel. It was in the back, and it was a European festival, so we're all being very European and quite staid. And then there was 2 or 3 of these massive, big silver trucks came in backstage, and then the doors opened, and then some girls came out on roller skates, and then this smoke came out, and then there was like these troops, and then there was more roller skates, and then he came out with around like 10 people round him. And it was one of the, I played a punk band, and this was one of the loudest shows I've ever been to or played. It was painful. You had people doing all kinds of stuff on stage. It was like entering a kind of a mothership of some sort. But George Clinton's groups, Parliament and Funkadelic. Parliament had more constructed stories. They had the whole mythology of P-Funk, which I'll talk about a little bit in a minute. And Funkadelic kind of leaned more to the ethereal and the spiritual, which is probably more reflective of them in that era of the late 60s when Funkadelic came around. So it was Funkadelic, and Parliament came after. So the Mothership Connection, which is the name of my book club. So why did I call it Mothership Connection? Obviously a big fan of George Clinton, but also it's that thing of how this idea of us as African diaspora, displaced people living in an alienated society. So kind of alienating society, sorry. So this idea of being from somewhere else kind of fits in with aliens and spaceships. So the Mothership Connection, even though it's a flying saucer, it really is about this idea of connecting back to African epistemologies, African ways of thinking, being, seeing the world. And when I wrote my piece for The Guardian, there was a big row on Guardian comments, as there always is, about someone had said that George Clinton and Parliament weren't political, because I'd mentioned this thing about them being from a different, bringing this political edge into their music. And there's a quote from this song, the spiritual song, Swing Down Chariot, that George Clinton uses in this song, and it's an old spiritual chant, and it's that chant that slaves used to use while working. Swing down, sweet chariot, stop me and let me ride. So there's all these references that he puts into the music, which is about escape, which is about redemption and liberation, etc. So P-Funk mythology. So on the Mothership Connection, Star Child, which is George in another form, it has all these different identities as well, is a divine alien being. He comes to Earth from a spaceship to bring the holy funk, with a capital F, not a small f, the cause of creation and source of energy and all life to humanity. As it turns out, Star Child secretly worked for Dr. Funkenstein, the intergalactic master of outer space funk, who's capable of fixing all of man's ills, because the bigger the headache, the bigger the pill, and he's the big pill. Dr. Funkenstein's predecessors had encoded the secrets of funk in the pyramids. Again, a lot of references to ancient Egypt, because encoded the secrets of funk in the pyramids became humanity. Wasn't ready for its existence until the modern era. And those of you who are into hip-hop as well can see the connections there with African Bambaataa as well, and Planet Rock and all that kind of stuff. So music and technology, we've seen with Sunra, talking about Cold War technologies. George Clinton was doing a lot of innovative stuff at the time, particularly in stage shows and production. And one of the music groups that comes up a lot in Afrofuturism is Drexciya. And Drexciya are from Detroit. They are two black guys. No one's really sure what they look like. They look like they're always wearing masks if they perform and things like that. And there's also this thing with black music culture of using the latest tools. We see it in grime, we see it in house music, we see it in a lot of things. And with Drexciya, it's techno. And I'm just going to play a little bit here, actually. It's a bit heavy, might be a bit much for this time in the afternoon, unless everyone wants to have a bit of a rave. But
you must face the power of the black wave of Laodicea before you become a Drexian wave jumper.
But what's interesting about Drexciya as well, so at the time they're using this technology which is quite forward in music, but then they're also bringing in a philosophy that underpins all of their work. And so they're putting together disparate strands of Afrofuturism, political activism and Platonic philosophy. The duo formed the detailed mythology of the Drexian people, who were an aquatic race descended from the children of pregnant slaves thrown overboard during the Atlantic crossing. So the music they produced were messages from the Drexian race. This song is called Wave Jumper, and the duo so it's creating a portal between Africa, contemporary America, and the depths of the Atlantic Ocean. And as the myths developed, so did the music. So as I was dancing on the stage for you guys here and talking about sort of looping of house music, that sort of 4/4/4 time, which directly comes from a lot of African rhythm. So I'm going to play after this just a bit of the, I'm pressing the wrong part. The Burundi, sacred drums of Burundi. And you'll see that the effect of this music is not very far from the effect caused by techno or electronic music, as these musical styles both work on the concept of loops. And whilst thinking about it, it's quite interesting to think about shamanism, and this is haunted machines, so we're talking about magic and sort of going into these sort of magical spaces. And as we know, shamanism is used colloquially as a blanket term to describe traditional tribal religions not stemming from Abrahamic faiths. And so thinking about Drexciya and the mythology that they're creating around the Drexian people, and then the Burundi sacred drums, and then if you're in a rave and you're listening to that music and you're being taken off into that space, it is effectively black music. There's that sort of shamanic thing that dance music has. So I'm just going to play a little bit here, and I think you can get a sense of what I'm talking about. There's always this thing about the circle as well, of like keeping a loop going, rather than in sort of a lot of Western music, which is kind of very forward in a march. So that's the sacred drums of Burundi there. I'm now going to talk a little bit about technology in black political resistance and as black liberation. And as we live in the age of the internet, and this is the FutureEverything Festival, I'm going to talk about things that are happening now, things of people that I communicate with online, and sort of black online culture, black liberation culture. And Colin Beckles wrote a piece, and in he quotes, throughout the black diaspora, the phrase knowledge is power has been a cultural tenet used by many communities of African descent in an attempt to liberate themselves from the oppressive throes of racism. The collections, storage and dissemination of information about how racism works in their communities, what groups and resources are available to combat racism, racism and what historically has been done continue to be a valuable weapon in our liberation struggle. So I was having a conversation with someone recently, and we were talking about science fiction by black writers and science fiction by white writers. And they said to me, have you noticed that a lot of black science fiction is actually, I wouldn't go as far as saying utopian, but doesn't have this relationship with technology, which is as negative sometimes. There isn't that dystopian sort of, this technology is going to be the end of us all and we're all going to end up like Borgs and all that kind of stuff. A lot of it is about that technology liberating us from certain spaces. And Black Girls Code is a group that started in the west coast of America, and its mission is to introduce programming and technology to a new generation of coders who will become builders of technological innovation and of their own futures. So they usually work with young girls between the ages of like 12, 16, and they teach these girls how to code, because there's obviously a lack of black women particularly in that industry. This idea of being the forward change, knowledge is power, that sort of thing. And blurred culture, which is something that's kind of sprung up, another thing that's sprung up online. Black nerd, blurred. We always put a B in front of anything, so we've got the blipster, which is the black hipster. So now we have the blurred, which is the black nerd. And when did this start to spring up? Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I started to notice a term pop up around the internet through hashtags, through a lot of stuff around black science fiction that I was talking about. And what does it say on the poster? I'm a dreamer and a doer. I see possibility everywhere. I'm the solution. I don't believe in waiting for change. I'm bilingual, which seems an odd thing to say. I look fear in the eye and keep going. I believe that awesomeness is a virtue. I think bow ties and glasses are sexy. I walk in the footsteps of those who come before me and blaze a trail for those who follow. I believe in reaching for the stars. So it's this, what I've noticed around kind of blurred culture is this thing about defying typical sort of black stereotypes of music lovers. I say that, I'm thinking about myself. But and people who are into technology and making that something that is something that black people can participate in. So that is happening a lot online. Black Twitter, the power of Black Twitter. And hashtags, Black Lives Matter, which is a campaign that I sometimes work with as well. And there's been some studies, and looking at how black people actually use Twitter is actually slightly different from our white counterparts. In comparison, this is in African Americans, 26% of African Americans who use the internet use Twitter, compared to 14% of online white, non-Hispanic Americans. In addition, 11% of African American Twitter users say they tweet at least once a day, compared to 3% of white users. And in August 2010, there was an article by Fahad Manjoo in Slate magazine, How Black People Use Twitter, which brought the community wider attention. He wrote that young black people appear to use Twitter in a particular way. They form tighter clusters on the network. They follow one another more readily, they retweet each other more often, and more of their posts are @replies, posts directed at other users. And he goes on to argue that the high level of reciprocity between the hundreds of users who initiate hashtags or black tags leads to a high-density influential network. So I don't know if anyone's ever engaged with Black Twitter here or been on the receiving end of Black Twitter here, but it is a force to be reckoned with online, and I engage with it quite a lot, like I said, with the Black Lives Matter campaign. And you see how that the Black Lives Matter started as a hashtag and then became a movement afterwards, and now it's an organisation. And I do a lot with Patrice, who heads that organisation, actually. So it's black people sort of connecting with each other and creating a voice in a digital space as well. So if you don't have a space in somewhere like this, you can create a voice in a digital space, which is what's happening with the hashtag. So yes, so technology as well. Technology in the future. There's a Kenyan film director. Where's her name gone? Just put it on a different page. Wanuri Kahiu, who made a short film, 20-minute film called Pumzi, which is set in the future. And you see use of technology to sort of, I guess, water sustainability, which is obviously quite a big issue in certain parts of the continent at the moment. And I would really recommend it, actually. It's a really beautiful film. And Wanuri talks a lot about Afrofuturism as well, particularly in African context, not the African diaspora context, just in an African context. And I might extend a bit on that a bit later when I'm on the panel. But in terms of sort of modern African Afrofuturist thought, her work is really sort of progressing that forward. So I've talked about the Dogon people and space, Sirius B, all this kind of stuff. Now, the Dogon people are from Mali in West Africa, and they're believed to be of Egyptian descent, and their astronomical law goes back thousands of years to 3,200 BC. According to their traditions, the star Sirius has a companion star which is invisible to the human eye. This companion star has 50-year elliptical orbit around the visible Sirius and is extremely heavy. It also rotates on an axis. But that's all the technical stuff. But the most interesting thing about this is that the stories that they are actually telling at that time, those stories were effectively real. Those planets weren't discovered until we had telescopes and things like that here. So again, a lot of Afrofuturists refers back to this story because it's about ancestors, myth, modern technology, and this idea of time and space in African ways of thinking being circular, being led by events rather than by dates, essentially. So I'm just going to end on an artist called Ras G, because I'm a DJ, so that's what I do. I'm going to play music because it's quite important to me. And the sort of modern musical Afrofuturist movement with groups like The Satisfaction, Shabazz Palaces. I'd also recommend, if people are interested in looking into this further, to have a look at websites like OK Africa, Shimaranga magazine, which is a zine coming from South Africa, which talks a lot about Afrofuturism as well. So I'm just going to end on this. It's called Ghetto Sci-Fi, and it's by Ras G in the African Space Programme.
The music is not only just music, it's like a journey which is endless. Unscheduled directions are suddenly necessary.